Thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see such a tremendous turnout here tonight. Our central question, of course, breaking news, can it be fixed? Subtitled, When the Lights Went Out in L.A. and L.A.'s Power Grid, Can It Be Saved? That'll be our subtitle here tonight. Thank you very much, Steve Kindred, for that gracious and generous introduction here tonight. And it's a pleasure and honor, of course, to be here tonight to participate in this very, very important discussion. RTNA hasn't had this event in about 3 years now. And when this came up on Steve Kindred's suggestion that we bring this important event back, I agreed immediately and set to bring this back here at USC, and it's a tremendous privilege to do so. We used to have this event in conjunction with a full-blown dinner in the whole works, so we'll have this discussion minus the rubber chicken tonight, so I hope nobody minds. Now, I'm delighted to see this fabulous turnout here tonight, and we're already very impressed here because eagles don't ordinarily flock, and that's what we're seeing here tonight, a chance to see the top people in any business at the same place at the same time, but we have accomplished that here tonight with our esteemed panel to discuss this very important issue. Let me present our panelists here this evening. Paula Madison is the president and general manager of KNBC, NBC's owned and operated station here in Los Angeles, named to that position in November of 2000. Now, she also has been regional general manager for NBC Telemundo TV stations here in the Los Angeles area, KVEA and KWHY. She has also served as vice president and senior vice president of diversity for the NBC network. Please welcome Paula Madison. Also with us here tonight is Bill Tanner, who has served as our executive vice president of programming of Spanish Broadcasting System since August of 2000. He's responsible for the programming of the stations as well as maintaining and improving the ratings of the stations, hiring news people and so forth. I was on one of his stations in South Florida at the time Hurricane Andrew hit Miami in 1992. He's also been on the air way ahead of his time. He was known as Tanner en la Mañana, the rock-solid #1 station in the South Florida radio market. Please welcome Mr. Bill Tanner. Judy Muller, of course, many of you know here in the audience, has been with ABC News, and she worked with the late, great Peter Jennings, has, of course, been on Nightline 2020 and other ABC News broadcasts since she joined ABC News in 1990. Judy Muller has covered stories ranging from the trial of Rodney King and the subsequent riots in L.A. in 1992. Before she joined ABC News, she spent 9 years as a correspondent for CBS News. She was part of the Challenger broadcast, which I had the privilege of being a part of as well back in the 1980s. She, of course, is also on the faculty here at USC. Please welcome Judy Muller. Jeff Wald, news director at KTLA Television Channel 5, his second tour of duty in that position, successfully positioned the KTLA News at 10 and KTLA Morning News as #1 here in Southern California. He's also served as executive director of news programming at KCOP Television, also a news talent agent at Media People in Beverly Hills, and has worked as news consultant at Frank N. Magid and Associates. Has won many honors, including outstanding journalist from the Society of Professional Journalists in recent years. Please welcome Jeff Wald. And now the gentleman who opened the door to me here in Los Angeles, Mr. Ed Pyle, who's the news director of KNX News Radio, spent more than a decade at KFWB 980, working as news producer, anchor, sports anchor, reporter, editor, and news director, and joined KNX as general assignment reporter in 1985, eventually becoming an executive news producer and officially succeeded Bob Sims as news director in April of 2002. He also is the recipient of the SPJ's Journalist of the Year Award this year. Please welcome Mr. Ed Pyle. Well, it's absolutely impressive that everybody came here tonight. Of course, there was some concern that because of the power failure that we wouldn't have this tremendous turnout. And somebody said to me, this couldn't have come at a worse time. Well, actually, it could have come at a worse time. It could happen right now. So thank God it didn't. And I have a piece of wire copy here. Apparently, utility workers connected the wrong wires, ladies and gentlemen, and caused the blackout across major portions of L.A., trapping people in elevators and snarling traffic at intersections. Hundreds of thousands of people were affected by the resulting power surge and outages, which were reported from downtown west of the Pacific Coast and north into the San Fernando Valley. Apparently, the engineering team of Snap, Crackle, and Pop was responsible for this very unfortunate power failure. Of course, it was a huge day for all of us here. Everyone here was involved in this that's on the stage here tonight. And let's talk about how this was handled, first of all. And as we get into our breaking news, can it be fixed discussion. Of course, there will be plenty of time for your questions, and we invite you to think about the answer to that central question and participate in our discussion. They say the last shall be first, so Mr. Ed Pyle, can I ask you, tell us about how that disaster today here in Los Angeles was handled.
Well, what I'd like to say is, first off, had I had a choice, I would have preferred being stuck in an elevator to trying to deal with the DWP's public information people. I really found it interesting and rather perplexing that the DWP was not able to furnish any kind of substantive information early on, and not just early on, but for a protracted period after the event. And it seems to me that it's a wonder that any of us, television or radio, were able to get on the air with anything that provided any useful information to the people who were watching and listening. I think it's just through the resourcefulness of our reporters, our editors, our producers, that we were able to put anything on that was really helpful to the people of Los Angeles. And just this brief several-hour interruption of power that lasted after the lights came back on in most of the buildings on the streets of Los Angeles and many parts of the city where traffic lights remained out until they could be manually put back into sync and on. I think it was remarkable that we were able to give the information we were under the circumstances. And I think it provided a message to us that even in that small a crisis, compared to what we have been watching in the Southeast here lately, we really have to get our ducks in a row. We really have to think about what we do when any sort of a major crisis hits. I mean, here we were talking at KFWB and KNX all day today, and prior to that, about our special program tonight at 5 o'clock, which I hope some of you heard, yes. A joint broadcast about being prepared for the big one, the big earthquake here in Southern California. And on that very day, we have this power outage over major sections of the city and suburbs, and because some people who were not customers of the LADWP, for example, Burbank and Glendale, were nonetheless affected because they buy power from the DWP. We see that this kind of a short-term crisis can provide major obstacles to us, and we have to learn to deal with those in a hurry and efficiently.
Mr. Pyle, of course, are responsible for organizing the radio coverage of this event today, and Paula Madison and Jeff Wald on the television side. Ms. Madison, how was this handled from your perspective today?
Well, I should say first that as a general manager, my role is a lot different than the news director, but seeing as how I used to be news director at WNBC in New York, I kind of remember what that's like. Exactly. So from my perspective, once we go through the many hoops it takes to get all of our power back up, some parts of our operation are on uninterrupted power source, so you have backup. And so you go to emergency generators. The news people are very good at getting the information and making sure that we're on air. The other part, which may not be that important to this audience, but is important to me in my new role, is that all of our computers having to do with our sales operations went down and stayed down for probably more than 3 hours. So it's a pretty good bet that the sales department's still back at the ranch trying to plug in some of that information that they weren't able to input earlier. The biggest thing for us is to make sure that the information that we are putting out, of course, is accurate and is timely over the air. And, of course, as we learned last week with what some of the stations in New Orleans had to go through, as well as the Picayune, the Times-Picayune, it becomes really, really important to pay special attention to your internet channel so that you would continue to put out accurate and timely information on that. And then you have a considerable number of people who are calling. They're calling. They want to know what's happening. Is there something wrong? And then you have to have a really smart and capable and patient person or persons who are working the switchboard This is a time right now where everybody, as you referred to earlier, is very antsy. So it becomes particularly important that we not speculate at any point, that we not speculate. In my case today, however, with everything else happening, power went down. I have family in town who we've moved from New Orleans, trying to make sure they're situated and setting them up with doctor's appointments. And in the middle of all of that, today is the premiere of the Martha Show when my air at 3 p.m. Does anybody know what time the report came out that LA was 90% back up? Okay, I'll tell you. It was about 2:47 for a show that's to premiere at 3 p.m. And at that point, I wasn't exactly sure whether Martha was going to appear at 3 p.m. So I have my boss on one phone just to let him know he's just landed somewhere. I still don't know where he was landing. And I had the executive producers of the Martha Show on the other. What are you going to do? And so I'm not listening to their advice. There's nothing for them to tell me. This is merely an FYI phone call. Just so you know, tomorrow morning, if you look at the ratings and you try to figure out what happened, well, it could be that all of, the Los Angeles number, which is a considerable amount, something like 6% of the entire ratings is dropped out. So okay, but I'll call you back. No, but listen to me, I'll call you back. Okay, I gotta hang up. Okay, so here's what they want. Well, I could take it to just past the start of 3 o'clock, maybe around 3:07 or so, but we gotta wait to see how the story unfolds. And I'm hanging up now. And then, because this is also premiere week sort of premiere week for the Ellen Show, which is at 4, because if you take it down and you're still into it at 3, you're not going to come back at 4 o'clock to go to regular programming and then come back with a newscast at 5. So if you go down that path, you're probably going to stay on that path, provided there's a real story. So this is not one where you can look to anyone for, so what are we going to do? This is one where, the sound you hear is that of the football hitting you squarely in the chest. So Bob Long, my vice president news director, when I hung up one phone, the other one started ringing. I was like, oh, okay, I can't say that. What? Hello? Paula, we just heard from, DWP that 90% of LA is up. Great, thanks, bye. Now I sit there for a moment. I go, okay, so I run marathons, and I ran one today. I ran down the hall, down the steps. Okay, just tell me that everybody's ready, that, they can come off the air now. You don't have a bunch of, is this done? Done. Okay, let's go with Martha at 3 o'clock. Now we got to make sure that Master Control is up and ready to roll a show that 2 minutes ago they thought they were rolling over, that news was going to be over. Now that gets to be very dangerous. And sometimes when you see stations go to black on air, and of course that's one of the last things you ever want to have happen. Because going black on air means there's no programming and no money. So to make sure that we don't go black on air, somebody's running around besides me, letting them know, no, we're going on. So we went on. So consequently, I stood in Bob's office and watched the first 7 minutes or so of Martha, and then I took a deep, relieved sigh, and this time strolled casually back upstairs to my office. That's what I did today.
I was on the air when the story unfolded, and of course there's nothing worse hearing dead air on radio as well, and I kept saying, this is KNX Los Angeles. This is KNX Los Angeles. And finally, we realized we were on the air, thank goodness, and we took it from there. So radio certainly, I think, rose to the occasion today after all was said and done. Jeff Wald, news director of KTLA Channel 5, also had to make the decision today whether to break into regular programming to report that the power was out. Now, for television, that might be a tough decision. How did you ultimately arrive at that decision, Jeff?
It was an easy decision. We did not break in because we figured we had no one to broadcast to. So we let the commercials run, and we didn't go through all the angst that Paula went through. And we had no information from the DWP except that there were there was a power failure in most of the counties. So we decided not to go with it. And I'll tell you that, for a news guy like me, that's a tough decision to make because I would like to break in, with the least thing happens because I want people to know. But this is part of the evolution and what I think has changed so much in television. And I watched it with great awe. I have a whole bunch of television sets in my office, so I see everybody else's air. And I'm watching mostly helicopter shots of traffic and freeway, and I'm listening to this inane, not on KNBC, but on a couple of your competitors. And I'm listening, and particularly somebody who's, I think, a very good competitor of yours, but I don't know who the reporter was. But it was the most inane banter I've ever heard in my life because they had no information. And I'm thinking, at that point, I'm saying, I'm really glad we're not cutting in. Because at that point, we knew that we had heard fairly early on from KNX that it was an engineer with the wrong wire or something like that. So we knew pretty early that it wasn't a terrorist act, even though everybody was jittery about all of that. So I feel good about it as much as a news person, I don't feel good about what we did today. But as a human being, I feel good that we didn't go on the air today. Does that make any sense? Yes. Thank you, June.
Yeah, we're going to be generous with our applause tonight. So
yes,
absolutely.
Please. Thank you.
Yes. We're going to cover a lot of ground, too. So, of course, we're going to have our reception following this discussion, and we'll get everybody out on time to watch Donna Fiducia tonight. No problem. Okay, now then, we will proceed now, getting back on track here with, of course, the other enormous story, which has been absolutely heartbreaking, of course. It reminded me of the situation we faced in Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I was part of WTVJ's coverage with Beverly White, as a matter of fact, from NBC News, and we were involved with that before, during, and after, and it was a god-awful tragedy. It did not involve flooding like this terrible situation does in New Orleans, but certainly this has raised a number of issues, as was written up in USA Today this past week. Katrina rekindling adversarial media, and this discussion is underway now. Judy Miller, can I get your impressions of the Katrina coverage and how the news media have been handling this terrible tragedy?
Well, first of all, I would just like to say, to hear the wonderful dulcet tones of Frank Mottek rolling over my, for my radio students, this is what's known as great pipes. Okay, just want to say. I think when I heard the title of this seminar a few weeks ago, breaking news, can it be fixed? I thought, well, that'll be a short night. Probably not. Let's go home. No, because I've been very down about coverage in the last few years. For instance, all those people in Aruba worrying about one missing girl. I'm sure it's a sad thing, but all the money that's spent all the time, talking about Natalie Holloway, and suddenly in a day, that's gone. And that's gone because a real event of catastrophic proportions happened, and it resurrected, I think, broadcast news. I don't think print was ever really in trouble in terms of what they did. They might have been in trouble in terms of readership, but for television especially, I think it has been some of the finest reporting I've seen in a long time. Of course, there have been some bad moments. I call one anchor/reporter down there who sort of grandly stood aside and motioned to a body, sort of using it as a prop. I mean, there are horrible moments like that. But there have been some very, very great moments. I think our team at Nightline has done some of the finest reporting they've done in a long, well, they've always done good reporting, but this has been spectacular. And what Frank was talking about is adversarial journalism or confrontational. Really what's happened is that the press has once again gotten that connection to the people. When the lens shows us what we cannot dispute, which is that thousands of people are in terrible trouble and nobody's helping them. And later you can blame whoever you want, but somebody has got to be blamed. Somebody's got to be asked the question, why aren't you helping these people? When you have reporters standing on the ground experiencing it, they are relating what everybody else is thinking at home. And that has, I think, reestablished a connection with the public that was rather cynical about the press. I think it's helped the media once again take back its proper role, which is to ask tough questions, which quite a few of them have been, I think, afraid to do in recent years. And I think it's been some of the finest reporting I've seen. So I think we're now, watch now. This is the tough time. As the weeks go on, will there be hyping? Will there be milking it? Will there be the first person to use the word closure? I'm waiting for that horrible word that they, well, they're finding closure now in the Astrodome. No. There will be some bad reporting, but I don't think it's going to be I think this has really been a seminal event. And our reporter, I'll just stop with this, one of our correspondents, David Muir, who's new to us in the last few years, he's very good. And he said something that really affected me. He said, so often in storms that don't add up to what we had thought they might be, you know, it goes from a Cat 4 to Category 2, and we're all kind of, oh, huh. You know, and there'll be reporters out there anyway, you know, holding onto a lamppost, you know, and exaggerating it. This is one case in which, you know, instead of exaggerating what the lens is showing, there wasn't a lens big enough. We couldn't get a lens big enough, and I don't think we still know. I'm hearing from my friends down there reporting on it saying, you really can't get it from what you're seeing. It's unbelievably devastating. There's no way to capture it. They do their best, but so that what happens is then you have to become a reporter. You have to just describe what's in front of you instead of trying to make it into something it's not. So I think it's been our finest hour, really.
Mr. Bill Tanner, yes.
Well, thank you.
Judy Miller. Everybody's getting it. And now Mr. Bill Tanner, who survived Hurricane Andrew, went through the storm in 1992. What are your impressions of Katrina coverage?
I think I watched the Katrina coverage on the New Orleans television stations on the internet. I watched WDSU, which is the NBC affiliate, go off saying that their management had told them it was not safe to be there anymore, and we're leaving, folks. And on came some channel from Florida, one of their sister stations. And WWL, Channel 4, which I think is the market leader, stayed with their coverage but moved to Baton Rouge, where they had a plan. They had an emergency plan set up, and they were able to stay on the air, and I think have been on the air continuously the whole time. I think exactly as Judy Miller said, that we've gotten a little hard news and some real reporting back from because of this terrible, terrible situation. And some thoughts about what was said today. I was in the position of just being a listener. I just gotten through eating lunch with a friend, and I tuned in KNX, and I heard this chaotic sound. And it was very alarming because I thought, what is wrong with them? They kept, on my end, I couldn't understand why you couldn't get the telephone on. And all this without understanding that there had been a power loss. I was just driving down through Beverly Hills, and there was no power loss. All the lights were going on, everything was fine.
The power never goes out in Beverly Hills, you understand?
That's right. And
Against the law.
And Frank was struggling to repeat what people were telling him on the telephone. I thought, and the radio guy in me goes, they can't get the phone on. It must be their new studios. What the hell is wrong? And then I realized, of course, they came in and did a recap and said that there was a power outage, but it was stunning how unprepared even a prepared group like KNX was just for this power outage. And so when you see people rise to cover something like the New Orleans situation, we're seeing, I think, the spotlight swing a little bit back toward news from entertainment. Nobody really likes to say it, I think, probably on this august panel, and there's some really fine people here. I feel intimidated in their presence. But the truth is that we all try to find out we try to think of how we're going to balance entertainment with information. And trying to strike that balance, I think, is what we'll be talking about tonight, because an awful lot of the people that are in this room, in this age group that I've talked to over the years, I've programmed top 40 radio stations and Spanish radio stations, all different kinds of radio stations, and you take it as an absolute that nobody wants to hear any news after 9 o'clock in the morning. So in a place where I've spent many years, and Frank and I actually competed in Miami back in the 70s, there's a situation where after 9 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to hear the news. There is no news. Not on the radio. So the reason for that is because it is taken as an article of faith that you people there who are in that 18 to 34 category don't want to hear the news unless it's Jon Stewart.
May I have a moment, Frank? I just want to explain what Bill heard today when he didn't hear KNX. When the power started going off in increments, starting in the San Fernando Valley where the incident occurred, it finally hit our studios near the La Brea Tar Pits in the LA Art Museum. And we were still on the air. We were reporting a large power outage, and we were still on the air when the power outage hit 5670 Wilshire Boulevard, because we have emergency power, of course, as any decent radio station, even in tiny markets, has. But when the power went out in the building, and all of the lights went out, and all of and our studio and our air monitors went out, so that we couldn't hear that we were on the air, we're not broadcasting at that time. Now we're in a new facility. We've only been there a little over 3 weeks, and unfortunately, the people on the air didn't know how to tell that we were really still on the air, even though they couldn't hear themselves. It took a few minutes to establish the fact that, hey, we're on the air. And at that point, of course, we began broadcasting. But the main culprit in our failure to be on the air continuously was the fact that the building, we're in a 30-story building on Wilshire Boulevard, the building power went off, and when the building power went off, the lights went out, the monitors went out, and we weren't serving the listeners for a number of minutes.
And then I heard your 5 o'clock show, and coming down here, I listened to the whole thing, and I thought to myself, gee, and we had that much sort of a chaotic feeling just because of a small power outage.
Oh, I know.
And so here we are.
So I have a question, and does that mean that, and I'm genuinely asking this because, you know, I moved here and I have an earthquake kit. Does that mean that if you had a radio, you could have turned it on and known that you were on the air? I mean,
if you had a portable radio,
yes.
you could have turned it on and known that we weren't on the air when we weren't trying, in effect, because we didn't know we were on the air. Now, henceforth, we're going to damn well know that we're on the air at all times that we are on the air. That's for certain. This was sort of an exercise for us in the first incident of its kind in a new facility that KFWB and KNX share.
I had a feeling we were on the air, and that's why I kept going. And then, through the grace of God, people started calling me on my cell phone, and I was able to get calls out. And through a rather high-placed source at City Hall, we were able to determine basically what happened there with the LADWP cutting the cable inadvertently, and of course, easing people's concerns. Everyone had been on edge, of course, following that tape that came out, and it was clear that it was not terrorism, thank God. So that was the situation there behind the scenes.
I was rather stunned to learn, somebody told me this because I was teaching this afternoon when I came out, that our network, ABC News, led with this story on the national newscast on its first feed when it still looked like it was, chaos. And they took the first feed out here, or the second feed, I guess, because we have football on Monday nights. And so the station here takes it early, like 4 or 4:30 or something. And because I had called in when the thing happened, I was outside eating lunch, and I called our desk and I said, we had a power outage here at USC, and I'm hearing now that it might be this whole area, which would be like downtown. Do you have power up there? And the fellow on the desk said, well, we don't. He said, are you hearing about it anywhere else? And I said, well, shouldn't you know? Well, what does DWP say? And they go, well, they don't say, they don't know. I said, but don't they have like backup generators in a war room with a grid? I'm picturing, isn't that all, now that we're all post 9/11, don't we have these,
A big map, right?
Well, a big map, And he said, no, they won't give us any answers. And I was having lunch with one of our folks from the PR department, and I said, well, you got your lesson for the week. Call that DWP guy down here and have him talk to your class about what went wrong. I mean, it's outrageous. When a whole city is on tenterhooks because of a report from 2 days before about this being a terrorist target, again, we get it all the time, but this is a new one. People are edgy. And I have a question about, Jeff, that wouldn't it have been better if you did know that this wasn't a terrorist attack? Why not just go on, and at least for that reason, go on the air and allay people's fears.
In retrospect, is probably what we should have done, to be honest.
Oh, you're no fun. Don't even
well, I
argue
could-
back.
I can lie to you.
Okay, no, okay.
What about a crawl? Did you do a crawl? One of those annoying crawls?
No,
on
we had
the-
the other thing is when something like this happens, and this is just, the technical side of things, certain equipment doesn't come back up and doesn't work. And we found out that certain computers in our newsroom were not hooked up to tech power. So, one of them in my office. So, these things will be fixed and taken care of. I don't know if you found similar things at your place, but we had
No,
We had
because
issues.
anybody who works for me or used to work for me or knows anything about me knows that I make people miserable if there are not plans. Like I said, I'm no longer a news director, but I still frequently go with 2 days with no sleep or 3 hours of sleep at night because I was in New York the first time the World Trade Center was bombed. I was there when the helicopter dropped, when, TWA Flight 800 blew up. You can't suddenly be alert and think clearly if that's not something that you're ever used to doing. So even these days, I deprive myself of sleep just to make sure that when whatever the big one is, that I'm still thinking. So today, what we learned was new guys decided that in order to bring up the air conditioning slowly on the lot in Burbank, they decided to cut the power to a portion of KNBC. So, I sent out some emails and made some phone calls and stuff and left things just to percolate so that tomorrow morning. But there's a bunch of people who know how really angry I am, and it'll get fixed. But the plan for us, in terms of how we execute it, I have this plan A, plan D,
Sure.
whatever. But then when somebody goes, oh, well, let's take down this grid so we can bring up, it's like, okay, what are you doing?
Was this a matter of one guy cutting a wire? Is that what I'm
Well,
hearing?
what really did happen? What do we know? Frank?
I mean, that's a very scary, that's a scary thing, isn't it?
What if it was two
Shouldn't we be
wires?
asking that question? One levee, one wire? I mean,
Utility workers connected the wrong wires and caused a blackout across major portions of L.A. today, trapping people in elevators and snarling traffic at intersections.
what a voice.
Exactly.
Mostly
like
clear
I'm listening.
tonight. Lows will be down around 55. Right now we're showing 78 degrees here at USC. KNX News Time. Almost time for your questions, ladies and gentlemen, so be thinking about some good questions, which we'll be putting to our panel here in just a moment. Now, of course, since the last time we had this discussion, which was a number of years ago now, the whole business has changed with Internet, of course, now competing with radio and television and newspapers and so on and so forth. I see Larry Pryor, who's a frequent guest in the news radio class that I teach. We talk about new technologies every semester, and good to see you here tonight. Where do you get your news? Internet, newspaper, radio? Do you wake up to radio, or are you just glad to wake up at all? Right down the line here, Jeff Wald, where do you get your news nowadays, please?
I turn on the KTLA morning news, of course. In the morning. On television. On the way to work, I listen to our air on a monitor. You should see my car. And KFWB and KNX flipping back and forth on the way in. I also, when I go downstairs, when I get up in the morning, I get on the internet and I check certain sites. AOL I open up to in the morning. So I think, this goes back, sure, the technology continues to evolve, but I think if you really want to be well informed today, you shouldn't only depend on one medium for your information. And, or one network or one, radio station or whatever. So the more you can learn from, whether it be the newspaper, the News Weekly, which goes into things a little bit more in depth, TV news, radio news, internet, go for it everywhere you can, because there's a lot of diverse views and a lot of interesting points out there. If anybody saw the LA Times, I've been looking for a way to use this as a prop today, but there was an article about Yahoo getting into the news business. So I commend you to read it, but it talks about how they're going to really go after. They hired this blogger journalist, Kevin Seitz, and they're going to compete with television news. So that's on the front page of today's LA Times business section. And in the same paper, There's a lovely article, which I also recommend. It says, "Bombs away on television news." And it says, "Want happy stories delivered by perky, perhaps half-naked anchors? The future of network broadcasting may suit you just fine." And Les Moonves, head of CBS, talks about how he's going to come up with some new reinvention of the wheel, which is going to be this infotainment thing that we always hear about. And it scares the living daylights out of me, all I can tell you.
I'm glad you raised that, because in the New York Times, Les Moonves did a rather extensive interview, and what Mr. Wald is referring to, the successor to Dan Rather, which of course is something else that we can talk about, that whole situation with the Dan Rather and the memo and so forth. The news anchor, the news director of CBS wants to use is not surprising, Moonves has said, referring to John Roberts, the chief White House correspondent for CBS and one of Andrew Hayward's leading choices. "That's bothering me," Moonves said. "On the one hand, we could have a newscast like The Big Breakfast in England, where women give the news in lingerie. Or there's Naked News, which is on cable in England. I saw a clip of it. It's a woman giving the news as she's getting undressed. And then on the other hand, you could have two boring people behind a desk. Our newscast has to be somewhere in between." Maybe John Roberts wearing lingerie. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah. Judy Muller, what do you think about that?
It's terrifying. I was just thinking, I'm ashamed of myself that I actually had this thought watching John Roberts out in the field. I actually thought, he looks better out of the studio. It's got that rugged look, and then I thought, oh, stop it. What are you doing? You're becoming one of them. But what was the question?
Yeah.
Do I want to see
The
John
president
Roberts
of CBS is talking about blending Naked News
Well,
with
you
two
have to
boring
say,
people behind a desk.
Let's give him a fair, that was half facetious. I mean, he's looking to draw in the 20-somethings. We've got a project that's going to be going on here, combining with 4 other journalism schools next year. I'm going to be running USC's version of it. It's called News 21. We're going to take 10 top graduate school, students from each school. We're going to do some investigative journalism. We hope it airs on PBS and NPR and various other places. We're going to try to show that you can have substantive content that is attractive to a younger generation, done by a younger generation. How we're going to do that is yet to be discovered, but I don't think you want to have to dumb down to people. Just because people are 18 to 30 doesn't mean they're stupid, and they don't want to be pandered to. They're not going to be watching, looking at this a network news perspective, they're not doing appointment watching anymore. They're not going to sit down at 6:30 and watch our evening news. I mean, no matter what we do, we can take their clothes off. We can, well, maybe they might watch then briefly, but that's not the answer. This generation goes to the internet. Yahoo getting into the news business is interesting. Kevin Seitz is a very good reporter. He's been with NBC. He's going to go to every war zone. He is the journalist of the future. He shoots his own stuff. He edits in the field. He blogs. He reports. He writes. He does broadcast. This is what we're trying to teach our students here to do. You've got to do it all, or you're going to be left out. And we've got to teach media literacy so people understand which outlets are credible and which ones aren't, because you've got so many choices. But to try to corral them all into watching a half an hour of news is a losing game. It's just not going to happen. So I think, whenever they say we're going to change the set, watch out. Because whenever they're changing the set, they're in trouble. So.
Well, we changed our set in January.
I'm sorry.
You changed your set last year.
No, but that's the cue. So I think that getting young people to watch is going to require young people to tell us. And I don't think it's a matter of pandering. Interesting enough, Anderson Cooper, who is really come of age with Hurricane Katrina as a reporter, I think he really found his legs on this. And he started first time I met him was when he was hired at ABC. He'd been doing Channel 1. Anderson Cooper graduated from Yale, couldn't get a job at a major broadcast, got himself a camera, went over to Bosnia, wherever he went to, and started shooting freelance and then he sold his stuff to Channel 1. He just went out and did it. He learned, he really, really said, I'm going to go do this. When he came to ABC, somebody at ABC said, oh, this is the future. We've got to hire this young guy. And they kind of dressed him in flannel. It was the grunge time, remember? And it was very, and they sent him out with this high camera, and gave him, and he was supposed to, we were seeing Anderson shooting his own stories and being very artsy. There were a lot of handheld shots, and we were all kind of throwing up at these whirling shots. And he did one thing that was just way over the top. And, of course, it never occurred to our people that our audience is smart enough to understand that if we can see Anderson holding the high 8 camera, then there's a professional cameraman standing behind him showing us him holding the high 8 camera. I mean, so he had a thing on. My daughter called after one of his pieces aired. My daughter is now a producer for CBS News Network, but she's about 30. And she called and said, "What was that I just saw in your evening news?" I said, "Oh, Anderson Cooper. He's supposed to attract your generation. Is it working?" She goes, "If I want to watch MTV, I'll watch MTV. Yeah. If I want to watch the news," and I passed that on to our executive producer. He says, "Your daughter's not typical." And I say, I think she is. I think this is a smart generation. They don't want to have, "Oh, this is your guy. Come watch us because he's in flannel and he's holding his own camera." I think that's condescending, and I think it's silly. And I think we've got to move away from that. Yeah.
My 13-year-old daughter would rather hear news from, forgive me, Hal Fishman or Paul Moyer than hear it from her peer. When it comes to, when something important happens, they want to hear it from an authority figure and somebody who's been around and recognizable and all that. So I don't buy some of the research. I don't know about you, Paula, but...
Well, my problem with all of this is that, you resort to that kind of behavior when there's really not news.
That's true.
If it's news, you can have a cyclops, somebody with one eye in the center of his forehead with spinach in his teeth. And people will still pay attention because it's truly news. And the problem right now for me, again, I will describe myself as a former daily journalist. The problem for me is that, we spend so much time dressing up nothing rather than investing the time, the money, and developing the skills in journalists so that they do understand what news is and how to find news. So the age-old art of enterprise reporting is one where, you think that people say, well, that's not as easy to do today. And the only thing I'll harken back to again, back in New York, reporters who did not come in with their own stories knew they were going to be fired. It's pretty simple. It's like, okay, so you're coming up to the desk today asking, what do you got going? Why are you asking me to hand you a story? If we're in New York City and the environs and with all the people who you bump into day in, day out, if every one of those people only had one story, what do you think, 16, 20 million stories out there? And you coming to me asking me, so what you got for me today? I can pretty much guarantee you that what I got for you is a pink slip. You're going to get fired. It is as simple as stop dressing up nothing. People say, oh, no, a story's got to be 1:30. Oh, a Vosot, 45 seconds. And I continue to point people to, well, then how does 60 Minutes survive? What happens with Dateline? What happens to 2020? I mean, pick any of those where stories go on for, 40 minutes. Sometimes they go on for the entire hour. At WNBC, did a lead story at 11 p.m. You know how long it was? 11 minutes. It would have been 20 minutes if it could have held up for 20 minutes. But it was an 11-minute story because that's what it took. And you know what? It still won the time period. It has to be a story. It can't be crap that you've learned how to shoot nice or edit creatively or stick some guy in a flannel shirt in front of it and say, and let me show you how edgy I can be. It's still not news. It's still crap. So whether it comes from a 13-year-old or a 33-year-old or a 93-year-old, as long as it's news, people will be there. All that we saw unfolding over the past 2 weeks in New Orleans and the environs around, the Gulf states, that's unfortunately when virtually any idiot can stand up and describe what he or she is seeing, provided you don't color it with your own bias and opinion. Just tell people what you're seeing. People go, oh my God, this is dreadful. Show them the pictures. The skill comes in when the story does not present when you don't bump into the story. You're not standing there as a human mic stand. This is what's happening behind me. Okay? The skill comes in when it looks like just a regular day in sunny Southern California. Just a regular, nice 80-degree day. Where's the news? Once you say it's sunny and 80, what do you think? 12, 16 million people out here? Everybody's got a story. Go find a story and tell it.
Well, I'd like to ask you, Paula, as a VP and GM, where then are the decisions made that we cover Natalie Holloway nonstop for days and days and weeks and months, and Michael Jackson until you wanted to butt your head into the wall? The people, the troops, the reporters, the editors, and the producers all knew that those stories were overdone, and yet we constantly see it. Is it only done at the national level in the case of a network news operation, or do some of these decisions rest with the general managers and the news directors at the local stations?
I think that a lot of these decisions rest with the general managers and the news directors, and frankly, I think a lot of the decisions rest with consultants, which is why I don't have any. You know, the first thing I do when I got my job, and this one is like, bye.
Bye-bye.
You know what? If you aren't in touch in your own market, now frankly, you know, I have problems too with the Michael Jackson story. It was interminable, but the fact is that you had a story that admittedly was over-reported and over-covered. It was overdone, but there was a story there. There was a story there. Now, were there any other stories that happened during that time? Sure there were. But did we pay the attention to them? Some places did and some didn't. When I first arrived in LA, there was virtually no coverage of the so-called energy crisis. None, zero, wasn't happening. And what happened was, you know, Rebecca Nieto works here. I stood in front of the news gathering crowd and said, okay, listen, every newscast, every night, the lead story is going to be this energy crisis. Every newscast, every night. And blow out the minute 30 crap. I don't want to hear it. Pretend that you are the person who has to actually write a check to pay this crazy bill. And you're having brownouts. And then ask people at the PUC or ask them, how can this happen? Tell me the truth. And the fact is that, in my estimation, see, I didn't grow up in a news world. I grew up on welfare in New York. I come from the disenfranchised people who don't have the voice. And when you do have a voice and you waste it is when I go nuts. It's like, why are you wasting our time with this? So, you know, where does it rest? I used to call it, and forgive me, I used to call it stupid producer school. We put all these people in front of somebody and we told them, this is a newscast. This is how it starts, this is the middle, and the water skiing squirrel always comes in at the end. I came out of newspapers, so I don't have a crazy perspective like that.
And it would be great to see news directors giving reporters time, shoe leather time in communities to go down and out and beyond and spend time in a community and find out what people in that community feel are the stories that aren't being told, because there are a lot of them. I do that with my students. I mean, they go out, my reporting Los Angeles class, and they spend each week in a different community, and they're not allowed to report on gangs or drugs. There's stories about that, but they're not allowed to cover them. And they have to find out stories that haven't been covered by the LA Times and the other places, original stories, which is a whole new concept to many of them. But it's a whole new concept to a lot of the reporters who work in this town, because they aren't given the freedom and the time to do it, to dig them up. You can't just wake up in the morning and say, I wonder if there's a story about. You got to go talk to people.
What
and that
happened?
time is money, and they don't get freed up to do it.
But why is the fluff there? Isn't it because people are trying to, at the general manager level, the news director level, whoever sets that is trying to use that infotainment to dress up things that they think will appeal to younger demographics?
I think
Or
it's
why do they do it? Why is it?
I think there is a pack journalism mentality that
yeah.
I've seen, that I fight every day. And one of the reporters that you mentioned, you fire them, I didn't really fire him, but there was somebody who he would constantly come to the desk and say, what have you got for me? And I got good and mad one day and said, you live in a certain area, you read your local paper, bring in a story every day or you're not going to be on the air. you're not going to get on the air. So I think that's what has to change. We've and I'm sure it's happening at all the stations. It's certainly happening at ours. I have 3 reporters now that don't get on the air every day unless they have a story, and they are devoted to doing more enterprise journalism. That's the direction that we're taking at our place.
As I understand it, at CBS News 60 Minutes, there is no assignment editor. Each of the correspondents are required to come to the table and bring a story to the show. So that's how it works there.
That's good.
This program is being simulcast, or actually webcast, on the USC website. So for amplification and for recording purposes, we ask that anyone who has a question out here in the audience, please step over to the microphones and on both sides here of the aisle, so we're able to get your questions in. We have some very impressive people in the audience here tonight, including David G. Hall, who's the Vice President of Infinity Broadcasting, which handles both KFWB and KNX News Radio. Mr. Hall, thank you very much for being here tonight. Also, Jorge Matei, the News Director of KMEX. The wonderful Gabriela Tessier, who's a dear friend, who's the co-host of KMEX Morning News. She is effervescent. In fact, I never knew when she ever wasn't. She's absolutely fantastic, so it's great to see you here tonight.
Frank, please.
Now,
you're killing us.
Let me ask Mr. Tanner. Of course, we focus on television for just a moment, but as far as radio's undergone quite a makeover as well. And what is your formula for attracting the younger audience and improving radio news?
I think you can attract a younger audience with radio news. I think you have to do it. I think it has to have credibility. I don't think we do it well at all. And I'll be the first person to say that. Basically, the article of faith in radio programming is, number one, don't ever put on any news after 9 o'clock in the morning. And number two, put on as little of it and make it as silly as possible between 6 and 9. And I think that while it's possible to say light things about the news, because people do that amongst themselves, they poke fun at the news or whatever's going on with the government and so forth, I think we have to find a way to balance that and make it, I'm sorry, use that word, entertaining as well as informative. And I don't understand why it's not appropriate to have a newscast at 5 o'clock on an FM station if you got out of work and you're wondering what happened with the power today. I don't see why having 2 or 3 minutes of news here and there on an FM station is such heresy, but I will tell you, try to find it in Los Angeles. It does not exist after 9 o'clock in the morning.
While the power is still on, let's go to our questioners right now. Go ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead with your question.
Hi, my name is Stan Ho, and I proposed at my last news organization that we have a game plan, a modus operandi, the way firefighters do in case there's an emergency in dealing with breaking news. So I was wondering if you were to devise a game plan, what would you do? How would you allocate your resources, divide the labor? Where do you send people? What do you have them do? And so forth.
Big question.
I'm not in charge of anything. I can't answer.
She's the general manager. Should be Paula.
Well, we have an emergency plan that people have hard copies of, and it's, it's online. There's a little, like a shield with it's a red shield with an E in it. You click on it, and the emergency plan pops up. So depending upon whatever that catastrophic event might be, from an earthquake to, a terrorist attack, there are various scenarios that we have plans regarding. What you are asking, however, is a part of what a news director will develop, and overwhelmingly, it'll be executed by an assignment editor or manager and a managing editor. Those are the people who, in terms of deploying the troops logistically, they are the ones who will overwhelmingly execute that. And then the plan extends beyond the news department, because the other people who work in a station know what your role is. If you're in sales, it doesn't mean that you sit at home, something big happened. You still have to get back to the station, because there comes a point where everybody is vital. And again, depending upon, if it's a major storm, you either come in or call in. You know whether you're supposed to come in or call in. and then you may be told to come in 12 hours later. So that what you don't have is everybody being exhausted at the same time. So different people work their plans differently, but I've got to figure that virtually every news organization has an emergency plan.
And we do, and I just pulled this out of my wallet. A green circle means all is well, your regular schedule applies. We put the little symbol on the screen. Yellow triangle, there is a problem, call your designated department contact. A red square means emergency schedule, news and technical staff report on emergency schedule. A crawl message may appear providing emergency information, et cetera, et cetera. So we have devised a whole plan, and all of us carry this little card so we remember what the symbol is so we know when to come in. But that's how we happen to do it. Sounds like a similar plan.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's try to get as many questions in as possible. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. My name is Felix Rodriguez-Lima. My question is to anybody who wants to take it. I was reading in an online journalism review live chat a couple of months ago that there's been the development of video journalists, people who will shoot their own material, go in on their laptops, and they'll go out in there and edit their own stories, things like that. And I'm just wondering what your take was on this video journalist thing, considering there are a few stations now in the country who are starting to take on this model.
Well, let me just answer it this way. It depends on the individual, and if the individual is smart enough and can do all those things, that's a wonderful way of telling the story. Again, it comes down to how well they're trained and how, both on the technical side and the editorial side. The problem is that the reason that idea has been hatched is to save money. It's not about quality. It's about the cheapest way to get the thing on the air. And I will tell you that, a number of people, hardworking people at all of our stations, our networks, work very hard to put the product on the air. That particular station you're probably talking about is KRO in San Francisco that recently made that announcement. And I have some deep concerns about that, about if they're able to attract people that can do all that, that's wonderful. But
And how credible are they?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but one-man bands have existed since the inception
But this
of
is
television.
like the cyber journalist.
I know, I got it, but I just want to make sure that in your question that you know that this is not new.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so it's just that now the question is in stations and markets that can afford to have 3 to 5 people go out and shoot, edit, write a story, that they're going to have one person do it.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thanks for the question. Let's go over here now. Your name, please.
Thank you. My name is Shauna Rappaport. Ms. Madison, you made a very interesting statement about the importance of really not having any personal bias or opinions as you're reporting, as far as good reporting is concerned. But I was wondering, anyone can respond. As far as the hurricane right now in New Orleans, which is obviously such a very touching and devastating incident, how do you suggest you report well on something like that without being too biased and having too much of your own personal opinion, without sounding very hard and cold and just reporting the facts?
I'd just like to clarify something. It's not possible to not have a bias.
Right.
My point is that you can't let it come through in your reporting. Now I'll back up and let you guys.
Well, I would take issue with your confusion of bias and human empathy. Experiencing something as a human being and reporting what you're experiencing all around you is not bias. It's the truth. Right. And if you stood there like some sort of robot and didn't have any reaction to the fact that people are dying all around you because they can't get water and food, I would think you should lose your job. So I think that's confusing the two.
We wouldn't want you to say that the hurricane is a good thing.
Yeah. On the one hand,
Right.
Right over here. Go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Dupuy. I'm from Pepperdine University visiting here.
Welcome.
I just had a question. With this increase of coverage of almost soft news, such as the Michael Jackson case and cutting to car chases like that, is that the result of this pressure of stations trying to be the first station to cover that news or trying to get the highest ratings? And if so, what can our generation do when we enter the force field to go back to journalistic standards? And,
Could I just take a crack at that? I just heard from a couple of my students who are now working in Hawaii at a station, and they just graduated last year. And came time, they were helping to produce, and the anchor said, well, we're not going to lead with Rehnquist dying. we're going to lead with the Hawaii USC football game score. Really. This is a Honolulu television station. And they both stood up and said, well, that's wrong. You know, Rehnquist dying is huge and affects all Americans for a long time. And they were kind of worried that it was going to get them in trouble, but they prevailed. And it ended up being the lead. And I was really proud of them.
Yeah.
You can stand up and say what's right. And you should. That's what we're trying. I gather you're a student here?
Pepperdine, yeah.
Well, whatever. I'm sure they're teaching you the right thing, too.
Very good. Thank you. We're almost set, so go right ahead. Your name, please?
My name is Simone Andrews, and I was just wondering, it seems like after every major incident that I'm just wondering, after everything is done, will news ever return to the journalistic standards that you hold them to? It just seems like once we have a big event, things are great, and then once it's gone, it just returns to the I think you said innate banter. So I'm just wondering if you think it will get better?
To me, it's like turning an aircraft carrier because people have been so programmed into doing things a certain way, and I think a lot of people need to kind of have the freedom to think for themselves a little bit more. And I think that's part of the leadership that you take in a news operation to make the change that you need to make, to be relevant and to stay on track. So I hope that that's what most of the organizations, certainly in a market like this, that have a lot of very good people that work there, and just keep them on track and move them back toward where they need to be. And I think in some cases, some of the stations have gotten away from it.
I just had a question about the radio thing too. Do you think that if you did it like MTV, have your news at the end? I know that's like, just for the younger generation, maybe if you had your news at the end so that you could listen to the radio and listen to the music and then have your news like 10 minutes every hour at the end, that maybe you would get more listeners. Because I know when it disrupts the music, I'm like, okay, I'm going to switch. And so maybe more if you had a substance, like the news at the end, where I could listen to all the news and then not really be interrupted by the music, maybe that could help.
Well, the music goes round and round, and you'd have to then define as, well, where's the
What's
end?
the end?
The end of the world.
The end of the world.
That would be newsworthy.
Sure. Thank you very much for your question. Go right ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead.
Hello, my name is Carla Marquez, and I'm actually a student at Cerritos College. I have a question regarding how you cover the news and how you decide where you go with your news. Now, sometimes when I watch Spanish news versus English news, I see the difference in focuses in different parts of a community. Like, English news might focus on the crime, but Spanish might talk more about the people who came out of that and were able to succeed. How do you see news really being able to help your communities and being able to develop your communities and possibly even changing policies in the future?
Well, I can tell you that with Spanish radio, that one of the things that the audience consistently tells you when you do focus groups, when you do whatever type of research, is they expect the radio station and the personalities specifically to help them. They want to be entertained, but they appreciate helping. That's a dimension that I don't think you see nearly as much of. Maybe we're a little bit more cynical in the English language, but in Spanish radio, with the two major Spanish personalities, that's a big component of what the audience expects from them.
Well,
next question over here, please.
Can I just?
Certainly, go right
We
ahead.
have both NBC and Telemundo stations in our operation, and one of the things that makes a significant distinction is that, for example, immigration issues will be much more of a priority for some of the viewers of Telemundo stations than it may be for the NBC station. And so the geographical location, we cover the same area. I mean, we're in the same area, but a lot of the news that will impact the lives of our Spanish-speaking viewers on Telemundo probably going to be more focused to a few areas than the wide swath that KNBC will necessarily cover. And I mean, you're absolutely right. The fact that such a significant number of people are fairly recent or recent to the United States means that there's a desire to gain assistance navigating the system. So at our stations, for example, on both sides, we're launching a Get Out the Vote, your vote counts campaign. And on the Telemundo stations, it becomes more of a focus. I can't say more frequency, but more of a focus, because this is a group of people who, until they exercise their right to vote, are probably going to have a much smaller voice than their numbers indicate that they should have. And having said that, there are 3 executives from our Telemundo stations sitting in the back. There's 2 assistant news directors and a managing editor back there. Yeah.
And what we find also is that there is a distinct lack of interest in what the federal government is doing among the Spanish-speaking viewers and listeners in LA. We just have failed to make them feel that it's relevant to their lives at all.
Huh.
And we welcome Jose Flores from KWHY and Al Corral from Channel 52. Let's go over here to the next question. Go ahead and introduce yourself. A familiar person here.
Hi, my name is Layla Gulen, and I was just kind of wondering, I've heard tonight that stuff about enterprise reporting, and that there's millions of stories to choose from every day. When you cross borders and you go into other countries, we're talking about billions of stories, and I'm just kind of wondering why local stations don't do a little bit more international reporting. I know that my travels abroad, I've witnessed that local news is really international news, and I'm just kind of wondering if this is something, that there's this dearth of international reporting in local news.
And it seems on the Spanish stations, I might add, that there seems to be more of an emphasis on international news, certainly,
yes,
based on what I have seen. And why doesn't that play, apparently, on the so-called Anglo stations here in this town, not that much international news? Mr. Tanner?
I don't know. I think the fact is that maybe the people, they're connected more to other parts of the world than they are to, the city one district over. That may be it, but I do believe that we have, what we're going to be faced with here, we are faced with presently, is assimilating this group of Hispanics, which continues to grow. If you've ever taken a look at the population projections, it's staggering. It's staggering. And the very future of everything we do, not only news, but of government and everything else, is going to depend on how we are able to deal with that population influx, because there's going to be so many of them. And at the moment, it's quite disturbing, because many people simply don't. When I ask them about, well, why do you feel that there's no interest? Why aren't you interested in the government? Oh, George Bush, he's going to do what he wants to do. Who cares?
I think
very simplistic.
I also think that some of the jingoism that you see, for example, during coverage of the Olympic Games, where it's almost entirely focused on what American athletes are doing, may also find its way into the way we assign our news and to prioritize our news in television and radio as well. And even though I'm news director of an all-news radio station, I have to admit that failure, and I think that it is something that those of us who are in positions to be able to influence what we cover and how often we cover it and how deeply we cover it ought to look at, because after all, the world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and yet we don't seem to include the rest of the world the way we might in our news coverage.
Thank you very much. Our next questioner, your name, please.
Hi, my name is Natasha. I'm a student here at Annenberg. And my question is, why do you think that it takes major crises like 9/11 or Katrina to bring out the best in journalism, but afterwards it kind of goes away, even though people are still hungry for news, like they still want the news, and as you've said, there's stories out there. Why do you think that it kind of just disseminates afterwards?
How do we maintain the quality?
Yeah. Or why is it there, and like, why does it take that to bring it, like a major crisis?
I think, unfortunately, there reaches a saturation level. You know, I've heard people already say, some of our viewers have called in and said they're enough with the hurricane already. You know, and and that's an unfortunate situation, because then maybe we're not doing a really good job of telling the human side of the story, or really finding the different angles every day. But I think there does get to a point where it gets overbearing. And I know that even with myself, who I've been in this business a long time, and I've seen a lot of terrible tragedies, you get to a point where you just can't take anymore, and you have to turn the television set off, or you have to turn the radio off. And maybe, again, that's our failure of not keeping it fresh and really, you know, getting the story out. And that's part of what we need to do, is continue to really stir it up and keep it going in a positive way.
I think we have to do a better job of helping people understand why they should care about, say, tens of thousands of poor people living in our cities before they end up in a crisis situation. You know, on a sunny day when they're in our cities struggling, and we can't seem to tell that story so people will care, is our shame, I think. And I think we have to find a way to make these stories important all the time, not in a scolding way, but in a way that makes us realize that we're neighbors. I mean, here in Los Angeles, you know, we got a line of demarcation, the 10 freeway, basically, that's been there it's been there as long as I've lived here, 15 years. And it might take an earthquake, it might take whatever it takes, but it shouldn't take that. And I think that's partly the responsibility, and it's going to take real leadership in newsrooms. That's my feeling.
It's a discussion I've had a number of times with my counterparts at our duopoly, which is the Los Angeles Times. We have this, you know, huge newspaper downtown, and I don't know how many in the audience even know the KTLA and Los Angeles Times are owned by the same company. But there's no communication, and very little communication. It's been a 5-year project of really, you know, beating the door down because of the cultural differences between print and broadcast. And I must tell you in this room, which will get beyond this room, that it's been very hard to convince the print journalists to really want to work with us and share their stories. Can you imagine if the 3,000 editorial people at the Los Angeles Times merged with the couple of hundred people that I have working at KTLA and really tell the stories of this community that really need to be told that aren't being told? Instead, we're covering the car chases.
And Jeff, why does
I'm being
senior
overly
management-
simplistic.
Excuse me.
Well, I agree. That
Insist
is,
on
I think, a tremendous issue within our own company.
Try to get a few more questions in before we have to wrap things up to begin the reception. Go right ahead, please.
There's a premise that I've got to disagree with, because the presumption, and each time this question is asked, is that unless a major story happens, that all the news that's on the air is bull, which is not true. You know, day in, day out, there are newscasts, even some of the really bad ones, that will have stories on it that's on the matter well told, that do speak to what I would consider to be quality journalism. The issue has to be frequency. It's got to be an increased frequency of quality. So, you know, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that the only time you ever see journalists, you know, shine is when Katrina happens. It's not true.
Hi, I'm Liza Dietrich. I go to Occidental College, and I was just wondering about reforms. I've heard you guys talk about a lot of how you feel that, like, many of your stories are crap or kind of bad, and so I was wondering, like, how you're thinking about reforming them. Seems like you're doing a very good job about, like, telling the people to go out and, like, talk to people, and, like, there's a story every day, but what about the people above you? Like, are they causing problems to you? It was very interesting to me to hear you say that you were thinking journalists were afraid now and there are bad vibes going on in the business world now, and I was wondering how the people, like, who are, like, managing you guys affect you and your stories. I was also wondering how you felt about independent media and whether you feel challenged by them or if you even read their stuff.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yes, sorry.
Wow. Are you talking to me?
All of you.
Okay, because I think I'm the one who said the thing about
Being
journalists
afraid.
I think there's a little bit of what I'm seeing in Katrina. I mean, I was being very specific here, where journalists are standing up and saying, account for this, explain yourself, how can this happen? Because in the lead up to the Iraqi war, and there's been some criticism that the media didn't do its job, it didn't ask hard enough questions. And I think felt a little snookered by the WMD thing. And now, given this chance, is saying, whoa, now we can see the facts. I mean, they couldn't see that there were no WMDs. That would be a very hard story to, how are you going to show that this was bad intelligence? It's very hard. But here, it's obvious. People screwed up here, and something's got to be done. It's an easy call. And I think that's part of it. It's easier to stand up and question.
Right. I was wondering, what your reforms were, and how your bosses are taking that, or if your bosses are interested in the truth and real stories.
Well, I work for really dedicated at ABC. I work for very dedicated journalists, people who are really good at what they do, and I would not. So my bosses are my executive producers and people who, for the most part, I think, really do care deeply about the news. What I think the worry is always, for all of us who are owned by corporations, in our case Disney, is that the bottom line more and more drives coverage. And we are getting that mix.
Are you trying to work around that? Or are you just taking the stories?
I do my best to wheedle my way.
All right. Next question on this side, please. Go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a student here at Annenberg. My question was regarding this idea that was mentioned tonight about the combination of entertainment and information in the news. For me personally, I can't stand it when there's a huge entertainment overlap, especially the thing that first comes to mind is a music radio station that will try to talk about politics, and then the people that are doing the commentary will get so into their own personal stories, and I can't stand it. I flick it right off. And that's why I enjoy newspaper, because I feel like it's the story itself and you're really getting just the information. So I guess what my question is do you think there's ever going to be a point in time when society will go back to just this interest in the actual information itself, or are we always going to have to serve it with this entertainment today? And what will take it to get it back to that point?
Well, I saw an interesting documentary last night on Independent Film Channel. I don't know if any of you might have seen, or previously at some other venue, Weapons of Mass Deception, which is a movie about how the government and the military managed the coverage of the invasion of Iraq and of activities leading up to the invasion, and the subsequent coverage after hostilities ended. And it was very interesting because a number of points were made in that. Many of you will probably remember prior to the war how the major cable news networks, I'm not sure about whether it was done on the net, cable news operations, I'm not sure if it was done on the networks, would have these dramatic beginnings to their coverage of the story, like Showdown with Saddam.
Dramatic music.
And like it was a program, not like it was a news. You couldn't just go to the anchor and have the anchor lead into the coverage, the reports from the scene or whatever, but you had to have this big opening. And it continues, the battle for Iraq or whatever the various ones did. And one of the people on this documentary that I saw referred to that and the coverage that we've all seen as this situation has unfolded as militainment, which I thought was a pretty interesting term to describe the way we certainly covered the immediate run-up to the war and the invasion of Iraq and the capture of Saddam. And every time I say one of these, I want to go like this because it's the way it looked on television.
Well, the simple thing is it's what I call, and I'm going to probably take some hits on this, but I call it the Foxification of the news. And Fox has been extremely successful by presenting what has for years been called advocacy journalism Latin America, it's a standard, and that is what Fox does now, and while saying that they don't do it, and which I think somehow makes fools of everyone that watches it. But that's I'm getting into deeper than I should be. But nevertheless, I think that all the pictures and the dramatic music. This is something I can recall in the CBS News for years, where there was absolutely in the style book you didn't put any music.
No, it was against the standards.
Yeah, you didn't do it at all. I mean, Cronkite never had music.
No.
And the teletype in the background, that was his music. And so I don't know why we're any better for that, but I think that if you want to talk about the lady that was asking about what does your boss think and so forth, I think the bosses are terrified of the fact that Fox is taking over the news business, and they're trying to copy the little things that they do, the news, music, and all that stuff. And I think it's
my favorite was terror in the heartland after the Oklahoma City bombing, like nothing bad had ever happened in the heartland before. But you've asked a tough question about what will it take to, and boy, I think the person, you sort of stumped the panel, But my answer is, and I know it just sounds so pedantic, but I think we just need to start teaching media literacy in the first grade on up so that people get what the difference is between Fox News or Howard Stern saying his opinion or for that matter, Jon Stewart, who's wonderful and I'm a big fan, but it's not the only place you should be getting your news. So, I think that's what we have to do is educate the audience. Because this isn't going to, you can't put it back in the genie lamp.
Last question, sir. Go right ahead.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Horowitz. At the beginning of this discussion, you mentioned the Los Angeles power outage and how the news organizations were having trouble reporting the story because you had trouble getting information from the public information officers. And to relate it back to the breaking news discussion that we're having, how do you go about trying to forge a relationship with these public information officers who seem sort of adversarial in terms of the coverage?
That's not a relationship issue that happened today. That was that
it's ongoing.
They didn't want to or know. They weren't ready to. They chose not to or they couldn't. So us taking the guy to lunch was really not going to change that. That's a function of there comes a point where
we took him to lunch and he didn't even help us. So.
Somebody who is in control down there says, okay, here's the statement. And until that happens, we can't, in the course of an hour or 2 hours, go undercover or call a source and find out what's happening because it's going to come from this one place. Most operations in town have pretty good relationships with the public information officers. But that's not what the issue was here. This is one where when they're ready to tell you, they're going to tell you. And sometimes, if one of them was sitting here, what they'd say is, as soon as we found out, we let the media know.
What I'm probably trying to ask is sort of more of an understanding perspective because you said, look, you have all these people who are out of power and, they need to know. And so from the DWP's perspective and from your perspective, you're feeling, well, we should get this information out. So how do you go about trying to get this information from the people who don't want to give it to you?
Gunpoint. No, I mean, there's nothing to do if they don't know. If they don't know or are incompetent or just unwilling, what you can tell your audience that. You can embarrass them by saying, it's been an hour now and DWP still doesn't have an answer for us. And we're pushing, but they just don't seem to know.
In 24 hours or 48 hours later, you may be able to get it from another source. Somebody close to who knows what's happening. But at that time, you're not going to be able to find out anything than what they want to tell you.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's the DWP or the LAPD.
Or the White House.
You keep telling your listeners or your viewers and listeners what you do know and what you can find, and you do it through your own resources. And for example, one of the things I did early on today, because we couldn't get through to DWP, was call the other power company. I called them. Now I can't think. Southern California Edison. And I called Southern California Edison and immediately got a response from them to the effect that those Southern California Edison customers were involved. So that much we knew. So you try to collect the information that's obtainable, and you get that on the air, and you keep doing that until you get some kind of official version from the source you're attempting to elicit it from. That's all you can do.
Just keep trying. That's what we can do. We're going to start our reception in just a moment, and hopefully our special guests will be able to stay and speak with you all for any further questions and so forth. I'd also like to go through the room here. We have some very special guests here tonight from LARadio.com, Mr. Don Barrett, which is an excellent source for those who are interested in the radio business. We have Professor Richard Walter, who's the chairman of the screenwriting department from another school across town, namely UCLA. Of course, June Lockhart here right at the front. Gabriela Tessier from KMEX, who co-hosts the morning show there. Jorge Matei, the news director of KMEX. Mr. David G. Hall, who is in the audience as well from Infinity Broadcasting. Peter Seymour, our technical director, who was there when the power went out this afternoon on the KNX Business Hour. We also have Mr. Michael Levine, who has a public relations company here in L.A. Also Mr. Vince DeLisi, news director of Fox Sports. Jeff Baugh, who's been in the helicopter all day long, who talks about breaking news, but breaking entertainment when we get the police chases, something we didn't get a chance to talk to that much. Rebecca Nieto from KNBC, thank you all for being here tonight. And can I just get a few final thoughts from you all here, words of inspiration to the students here who want to pursue this wonderful business? Judy Muller.
Well, I just love what I do, and I think that there's a tremendous honor in telling people's stories well and responsibly and caring and with care. And I just don't think there's a much higher calling, no matter what they say. So I just encourage you all to keep doing it.
It's an awesome responsibility. It's been a great career for me. I have no regrets, honestly. And I just think it's exciting. You learn something new every day. You get to inform the people so they can make intelligent decisions in their lives. And I think it's been very, very rewarding. So I encourage you to go for it.
It's a wonderful profession, and there's room at the top for people some of whom can be really smart and sensible, and a lot of them won't be smart. But if you're sitting here and you know that what you are seeing, listening to, and reading is not what you believe it should be, then get yourself ready to take over.
Get the best set of the facts that you can get and tell the story in a memorable way.
It can be a stable profession. Last Friday, I celebrated my 20th year at KNX Radio, and I want to thank David G. Hall for that. And I want to leave you with something I've told every one of Frank Mottek's classes when I have visited those classes, and that is one of the things I learned as a reporter when I was one at KNX Radio some years back was it's much more fun and much more fulfilling and much less annoying if you come to the assignment desk every day with an idea that you want to do, with a story that you want to pursue, so that you don't have to end up at the LA County Board of Supervisors.
Very, very good advice.
Or worse yet, the City Council.
Thank you very much to Jeffrey Cowan, Patricia Dean, of course, from USC, also Jeff Baum and Giovanna Carrera, and also want to acknowledge Ernie Morello's here from KBEA, and Rick Morales, the managing editor for Telemundo. We're going to have our reception here in just a moment. Please join me in, again, expressing our tremendous appreciation on what's been a tough news day to all of our panelists here, Judy Muller, Jeff Wald, Paula Madison, Bill Tanner, and Ed Pyle. Thank you all. We'll see you at the reception. And thank you, LADWP, for keeping the lights on during the program tonight. Thank you very much.